of this conference. I'll just explain a little bit what we're going to do in the second session because it's a little different. So we're going to have a second panel where we're really going to focus on the work we're doing. And then each speaker is going to speak so Jill's going to speak for 20 minutes and every other speaker is going to speak for 10 minutes. And then we're going to break out into working groups where you're going to do a little bit of work. And just to be really, really specific, we're hoping that what will come out of the working groups are some actions we can do together. Some campaigns that maybe we're already working on, which we can take forward together. Some way to keep the network that is in this room right now somehow together moving forward to tackle all the problems which we heard a lot about in the first session. And so after the working groups, I'm going to come around and get a quick announcement for each working group. And at the very end, I'd love us to come back together for just 5 minutes so I can tell you where to find each other in the future. So what we're going to do, these are going to be 4 or 5 things that we can do in the future together. And then at the very end, we'll have some special music. So please try and stick around if at all you can. So I'll introduce our first speaker. Probably doesn't need much introduction, but we have Dr. Jill Stein with us. Woo! Of course, she's a physician and longtime teacher of internal medicine and pioneering environmental health advocate. She was, of course, the nominee of the Green Party for President for the United States in the 2012 election, as well as the author of many reports and articles on environmental and human health, such as In Harm's Way, Toxic Threats to Child Development. Thank you very much. Welcome, Jill.
Great, thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you everybody who's here. Thank you to all the groups that made this conference possible. It's a really wonderful, amazing conference. We had an eco-socialist forum last February before the big Washington anti-pipeline demonstration. And that was the first of the series that I had ever been to or had ever heard of. And what's amazing to me is how much this conversation has really grown and deepened and become much more public and much more engaging. So I think we're on to something, and thanks to everybody who's been making that happen. So keep up the amazing work. I'm going to run through some stuff really quickly. This sort of combines a bunch of talks, but I wanted to sort of lay out what seems like an amazing, timely opportunity. In so many ways, we are at a crossroads, at a tipping point, at a breaking point, all of that. And so much depends on what we do. And I think, the possibilities are really limitless right now. In many ways, there is a rebellion that's going on, sort of beneath the radar. And I came away from that national adventure 2 years ago where you kind of get this bird's eye view because you just sort of touch down all over the place with communities that are really active and inspired and doing great stuff and on fire. And I came away from that feeling like, there really is a rebellion going on. We just don't know it because, the media kind of keeps us under the rug, under the radar, under their hand of oppression and silence and all of that, but that there's an incredibly powerful movement going on. And many of the speakers here today have already alluded to that, but I just want to reinforce that idea that we are much more powerful than we're told to believe we are. And I want to start with the words that I will end with, which are the words of Alice Walker, who says that the biggest way people give up power is by not realizing we have it to start with. So what I'm here to say really is that we do have the power to change our future, to really decide our future. And that power is all about our getting together and overcoming these traditional silos that have told us, it's climate justice over there, and it's labor justice over there, and it's health justice here, and it's the anti-war community, and it's immigrant rights, and anti-poverty work, and that it's the student movement, that these are separate movements. That's absolutely false, and that is really the only thing that we have to overcome. This mythology of our separateness. So I'm going to sort of run through a few sort of basic context and ideas about how ready we are to go. And all we have to do, I think, really is pull the trigger in a non-violent way, of course, so I don't mean that like literally, please. But it does feel like we are totally primed. And we're told, you know, be quiet, don't stand up, don't protest, don't demand. But in fact, that's all we need to do. And I want to just start with one concept that was very motivating to this idea of creating a unified justice movement, which is why we have this motto of people, planet, and peace over profit. It feels like this has been a long time coming for us to realize sort of what are the critical foundations of this movement. And for a while we were getting at people, planet, and peace, but it was adding over profit, I think, that actually gave it some traction and some, you know, a real agenda and a real vision. And it sorts the wheat from the chaff. Because if you're not ready to look at the profit piece of it, none of the rest of it is going to move forward. So it's been really exciting to see who's ready to stand up for people, planet, and peace over profit. And it's kind of gathering a lot of momentum quickly, coming up on Earth Day to May Day, which is really the first project of this global climate convergence, we call it. But the quick little story I wanted to tell you was about last May, and I think probably a lot of you were involved, when we had about 3 weeks notice that a lot of people were going to get out for this Millions Against Monsanto thing, which was basically a zero budget campaign that just went out on Facebook, and the idea was just get out, you know, get a sign, get out, stand up, take a picture. And it was about, you know, 2.2 million people in 50 countries around the world that said, hey, that's a good idea, food sovereignty, you know, food justice, getting back to our traditional food economies. That's what this is all about. It's about overturning the commodification of our food systems and the industrialization of food. This is a disaster for our economy, for our food system, for our democracy, for our health, for our climate, you name it. Food is a very convergent issue. And all these people got out. And everybody was like blown away by it. Nobody more than Monsanto. Because within a week, Monsanto said, okay, we surrender, we're giving up on Europe. And it so brought home that just by unveiling ourselves, by undisappearing ourselves, by refusing to be pushed under the radar and behind a smokescreen, that in itself is an extraordinarily powerful first step. And we got to thinking, well, if 2.2 million people would do that on the issue of food security alone and food sovereignty, how many would come out for jobs and for living wages and for health care as a human right and for downsizing the military and for stopping the TPP, you know, and for rescuing the climate? Because these things all do go together substantively as issues. They all fit together. You can't actually achieve any one of them unless you also achieve the rest of them. So what if we had a day to do all of that? What would that be like? You know, there'd be so many people out there, there'd be almost no one left sitting down. So we started toying with this idea, well, what if we actually do it? And that's what this project kind of grew out of. This idea of, well, hey, let's just synchronize our watches and all come out on the same day, doing what we usually do and talking about what we usually talk about, but also acknowledge how we are connected. And I'll get to the details of what these events are doing to be a part of the convergence. But it's basically that concept that we just stand up. It's like from, I think, 17th century navigation, you know, when people sailed around in ships. They had this motto, when you're in a storm, you need one hand for yourself and you need one hand for the ship. And we're kind of in that storm right now. So the idea here is, let's stand up on the issue we are fighting on, whether it's the power plant on the Navajo reservation, or it's transportation justice in Boston and the need for a youth pass. Let's stand up for that. But at the same time, let's acknowledge we're also in this for people, planet, and peace over profit. Because if you put together these thousands of movements for justice and democracy that are sweeping across the planet right now, the minute we are connected, we become absolutely unstoppable. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what the climate convergence is. It's an effort to start creating sort of an infrastructure and a network whereby we can lift up our local struggles at the same time that we push forward on this broader agenda to say that we are a unified justice movement. In many ways, the Global South is way ahead of us on this because they have a unified justice movement. And it's interesting how the Cochabamba People's Agreement grew out of the fight for water. And initially it was an insider fight for water that then became an outsider fight for water, and they moved outside of the traditional government and nonprofit organizations that were holding their conferences every year, and they said, this isn't getting us anywhere, we need to hold the alternative conference. They began doing that, and then it became, instead of just securing water, it became water as a human right. And then it became earth rights, the rights of Mother Nature and the rights of Mother Earth as rights unto themselves that go hand in hand with human rights. And in 2007, the conference took place in Mexico City, I think, where they launched these 17 different committees that then in 2010 came back, and that became the Cochabamba People's Accord, which then launched constitutional protections for Mother Nature and the rights of Mother Earth and the rights of people and a transformative economic system. So you have in the Global South now really a coherent vision that brings people together across economic justice, across transformational economic reform, across climate, water rights, you name it. It's a very comprehensive justice movement. We need a justice movement like that here in North America and really in the global North, so we can catch up and start supporting the Global South. In a way, the global climate convergence attempts to start laying the groundwork for that, for building truly a global justice movement. And I would say, this is one of many. There are many wonderful organizations and efforts going on. And you heard about many of them today. And what we're doing in the Global Climate Convergence is trying to fill some of the critical gaps to help make these connections so that it can truly power up. So Earth Day, Mother Earth Day to May Day, as I mentioned, is sort of the first project that launches this Global Climate Convergence. Technically, the Global Climate Convergence is an education and direct action campaign. So it's intended to really cover the waterfront. It's about education, it's about demonstrations, but it's also about direct action. And it's intended to bring people in wherever they are on that spectrum. And many of us are advancing on that spectrum as the crisis becomes bigger. And by that I mean the economic, the justice crisis, and the ecological crisis. It's a comprehensive campaign. The idea is to launch it Earth Day to May Day because you have the spectrum of justice right there. And it seems like, wow, here's 10 days, we can connect the dots on this spectrum of justice. So you have Earth Day for planetary, ecological, Mother Earth, climate, justice. And then 10 days later, you have May Day, which is justice for workers and justice for immigrants. And then you have everything in between. So the thinking was, wow, let's get out and encourage people who do May Day to come to Earth Day, and people who do Earth Day to go to May Day, and all the rest in between, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the rest. And let's start building that larger community as we go. I'm just going to breeze through some pictures here. That's Tahrir Square, by way of making the point that this justice movement really is in full swing. It's out there, it's happening. So Tahrir, Tunisia, I'm sorry, there's Tahrir, here's Tunisia, and Turkey, Occupy Wall Street, the anti-austerity movements, which are really running from Europe, Greece, Portugal, Spain, to South America, certainly, and actually here in this country as well, Colombia as well, the nationwide strike that took place there recently with hundreds of thousands of people protesting the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. The student movement, and you see at the top Quebec on the left, the anti-debt movement on the right. In the center there, that's Cooper Union, where the students who had had free access to education had it taken away from them, and then they occupied their dean's office for many weeks and were basically granted a reprieve. And those negotiations, last I heard, were ongoing. You see the students who occupied Governor Rick Scott's office below that. This was the Dreamers Defense. The teachers on strike in Chicago, the workers who are standing up like we haven't seen in generations for good wages and for the rights to unionize. We have the upsurge of the immigrant rights movement, the eviction blockades, communities standing up to defend homeowners who've been basically rooked by predatory lending, the Indigenous Rights movements who've been, showing such incredible acts of courage. This is the Umatilla and Warm Spring tribes in Oregon who laid down in front of the megaload trucks to stop them from going through their tribal lands en route to the tar sands in Alberta. And just doing an amazing job. This is the Rosebud Sioux in South Dakota, and what they said in setting up these encampments recently, where they are looking to block with these sacred sites that they have set up, these prayer encampments, in the hopes that they will have some treaty protections, but it remains to be seen. And they're saying they're not moving. They're going to defend this land because their children's lives depend on it, and as Sherry was saying, all of our lives depend on it. I'm going to move just really quickly here. Let's see if I can get past this. It always likes to stay there. I'm not going to take the time to explain this, except to say that we're clearly, we have an economic crisis. I don't think anybody here needs to be persuaded of that. And we truly have a climate crisis as well. We heard from the IPCC report a couple days ago, speaking in language that they have never used before, about how this is it, folks. This is the time to actually make things move. I won't bother explaining these charts. This one you recognize, that we're basically halfway to zero on the Arctic ice sheet, and when that melts, we get to a tipping point. This just shows methane coming out of the East Siberian Arctic shelf. And are people familiar with methane? Yeah, so I won't talk more about methane, except to say, and the top line there, actually don't bother the top line. The next one is just all the fossil fuel emissions since 1750. Okay, and then the possible emissions, okay, and the next one is the tar sands. So the tar sands would mobilize as much as all of the greenhouse gases as have been emitted since the Industrial Revolution. Then the bottom line is what a single methane burp, it's called, if a big methane bubble comes out of the East Siberian Sea, that's how much greenhouse gas warming comes out with that. So this is why we don't want to go over that tipping point. But these are some of the triggers of that tipping point. If you get more warming from the Keystone, from tar sands, from coal trains, offshore oil, fracking, you name it, all of it should be treated as lethal. It's all lethal. It's lethal to the communities who are impacted. It's lethal to the workers, actually, who are working on it. Even though they're well paid, they pay with their health and often with their lives, very high mortality, working in those jobs. This is Boston today. This is Boston if the Greenland ice sheet goes, okay? So we don't want to go there, but we're kind of almost there. So this is by way of saying, we can fix this and we can actually fix it now. We're way more powerful than you think if we actually get connected, and it's not rocket science how to do this. We can model this after the New Deal, which put a whole lot of people back to work, public jobs. We could do that right now in a heartbeat. Let's solve the economic crisis and put people back to work in community-based employment, creating sustainable communities. And that means sustainable in terms of energy, as well as sustainable socially, meeting social needs. There's no excuse not to go there. And in fact, you can put everyone back to work right now, have 100% clean renewable energy by 2030, and it pays for itself just in our health savings alone, because we save so much money from the sickness caused by pollution. So simply pollution prevention and its benefits for health pays for the cost of transition. There's no excuse not to have just transition right now. And we don't need to be shy about insisting on it, because our lives really do depend on it. There are a variety of other reforms that go with this. I'll just finish up, that's Alice Walker's quote. There's a handout that I think got passed around. Did that go out yet? Yeah, which gives you the website. Getting out for Earth Day to May Day, there are now about 100 actions being planned around the country, and a variety of groups that are involved. The idea, in order to be a convergence event, you simply use the motto, use the logo, that is the hand with the earth, because it helps create a sense of identity and unity, strength in numbers. Be convergent. In other words, don't just be a coal plant event. If you can be coal and labor justice, or student justice, student debt. We really encourage people to use this as an opportunity to reach out to allied movements, and let's do our stuff together and start building the basis of this broad, unstoppable movement. And to mention, we're encouraging people to mention that this is actually solvable. It's not like it's rocket science and we don't know what to do. They would very much like us to think that we're not capable of solving this. But in fact, this is like really simple how we solve it. We just get out and do what needs to be done, and we put people ahead of profit, and we put tested solutions to work, which are truly based on grassroots solutions and grassroots justice. It's not rocket science, it can be done. There are all kinds of organizing tools that are available at the website. We also have a $200 grant for getting food, for sustainable local food, for bringing it to your event. And you can still apply for that. And it is as yet unused. That is, there's plenty left. So if you're going to if you want to schedule an event, or your event is already happening, but just connect it to the convergence, you get a $200 food budget for it. That's coming from the Organic Consumers Association, by the way, the Millions Against Monsanto. So there's all kinds of fun stuff, including these cross-country solidarity actions. There are these light up the night actions with the overpass light brigades. There are 30 to 40 of them around the country. I'm sure they are, if not in Boston, then not far away, where we have sort of a solidarity evening with a common theme. So on the night of the 25th, Friday the 25th, we're doing a solidarity action for people, planet, and peace over profit. We'll be doing other solidarity events, anti-fracking, pro-living wage, etc. And this is also, this is the Light Brigade. This was the Denver chapter of the Light Brigade doing a little commentary on the Supreme Court decision. SCOTUS with a money sign in place of the F, that's the Supreme Court of the United States. So with that, I'll end there and encourage you to continue the conversation at globalclimateconvergence.org, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. So next we're going to hear from Kalila Barnett, who's with the organization Alternatives for Community and Environment, or ACE. I'm sure a lot of you know about them. Kalila became ACE's executive director in February 2009. She was previously a senior organizer at Community Labor United and served on ACE's board of directors for 5 years. She's a Roxbury native and a lifelong resident of Boston. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to speak really briefly because I know we're a little bit trying to adjust the schedule so we have an opportunity for good conversations in the breakouts. So very happy to be here. ACE just moved our offices, so I'm trying to recover from moving a lot of boxes and sweeping and all kinds of miscellaneous tasks are involved in moving an office. So I'm glad to have the opportunity for this really important conversation. And I got to hear a little bit of the session this morning, and one of the things that really, or this afternoon rather, one of the things that really stuck with me was with what Sherry was talking about, is just this idea that we're being told this lie that we can't actually change this, and the problem seems so incredibly huge and insurmountable. As a person that's involved in this work, I hope, for the rest of my life, there are days when I'm just like, I don't know if it's going to happen. But it's nice to be among folks who can support each other and encourage each other when we have those moments where we're like, not sure if it's going to happen, right? So it is really about us coming together and doing something great. So I want to say just a couple of quick things about ACE, and then also just share a little bit of sort of my thinking around the conversation, and perhaps we can kind of continue that within the small group. So ACE stands for Alternatives for Community and Environment. We are an environmental justice organization. How many folks in the room have heard of environmental justice? Excellent. So for those of you that haven't, and also just to share that, the particular pieces of that analysis and that movement that are important to me, it's a movement that was founded and built by people that were directly affected by the environmental crisis before it became, sort of a mainstream kind of problem and conversation. Communities of color, women, immigrants, workers who were fighting against polluting facilities that were placed literally next door to them, literally on their properties, in their backyards. Babies getting sick and dying from polluting power plants, businesses literally dumping in people's backyards. And those folks were not finding a home in the mainstream environmental movement, which was talking about conservation and not really talking about the people, not really talking about how the environment is a piece of a larger system that humanity is connected to, and that we cannot fix the environment to the extent that we have even the ego to say that we can fix it if we're not talking about how people are connected and involved in that. And so this movement sprung up, and ACE was one of the organizations that came together here in Boston. We spent most of our time over our 20 years being in Roxbury, just across the other side of Rebel Station in Dudley Square. And it's a community that we are very much committed to and remain connected with. So we do our work through 3 different main areas. And our mission is about building the power of low-income communities and communities of color to eradicate environmental racism and classism and achieve environmental justice, as well as building healthy and sustainable communities. So it's a huge mission, and we don't do that work alone. So the first method that we use as an organization is community organizing. So we believe, as many folks on the panel this afternoon mentioned, that this change needs to come from the bottom up. It needs to come from the people. It needs to come from people who are directly experiencing these problems. They have to be at the table when decisions are being made about what happens within their communities, period. And so community organizing is a way of building collective solutions to what is going on. The second method that we use around changing the system is also providing legal and technical assistance. So we understand that because of the structure in which we live right now, part of how we make change is by changing the laws and policies that govern what happens in our communities. And so we partner with community-based organizations, neighborhood associations across the state of Massachusetts to provide legal services so that they have a voice in the court system, they have a voice in the regulatory system about the things that they've decided need to change within their communities. And finally, the last way that we work is through strategic coalitions. So ACE is a movement building organization. We talked a lot about movement building today. And so we understand that the things that we want to see happen and come to pass in the world are not ones that are in total control of our organization. And so we need to partner with people that are like-minded, people that also care about the same issues that we do in order to build a powerful force for change. And so we partner with the Green Justice Coalition, which Nina is a part of through the Boston Climate Action Network, the Right to the City Alliance, which focuses on anti-gentrification, housing and land issues within cities across the country. We have a Massachusetts Environmental Justice Alliance, which I'm going to talk a little bit about when we get into our small group, because there is a specific action that folks can take around supporting that work today. So we just, really believe that it's really critical for folks to partner and to work together if we're going to be able to build the kind of power that we need to build. And I think the other thing that I just sort of want to close with is, thinking about how do we address this crisis? Everything is so big. And I think, one of the things that I just want to really kind of reinforce for people is that the method to change, this work is about mobilizations and conversations and events like this, but it's also about that really kind of boring, hard work of knocking on the door of somebody that lives in your neighborhood, having a conversation with them about where they're at. It is about, following up with people, building those relationships to make the kinds of changes that we need to see. So organizing is a fundamental piece of how we're going to actually build this movement to change. And so I think as people are thinking about what is it that we can do, I want people to think about organizing, right? I want people to think about what is it that I can see within my community to become a part of an organization that's going to help do the day-to-day work that is just hard. And it's, but it is a critical kind of really basis of this, because ultimately, this is really a political problem that we're facing, right? It is not a scientific problem. It is, we don't have the power that we need right now in order to make the change that we want to see happen. So how do we actually sort of build that? How do we build that sort of wave that's going to overtake the forces that are actually against us in what we're trying to do? And, that is a major culture shift that we all need to think about. How do we participate in kind of making that change? So hopefully in the conversation that we have, I can share a little bit more specifically about ACE's campaigns around land and food, air and water, public transit, and we can talk a little bit about organizing and what that means and what are the places where folks in the room can get engaged. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bella. And the next our speaker, his name is Peter Rue, and he's going to talk about the organization, which is a new organization called System Change, Not Climate Change. It has a great graphic, so that's why it's up there. So Peter is an independent journalist based in Brooklyn, New York. He reports for Vice News, is a columnist for Policy Mike, and is a correspondent at wagingnonviolence.org, a website that covers social movements from around the globe.
Cool. Thank you, Becca. So I'll go into the history of System Change, Not Climate Change in a moment. We're a relatively new organization that started about a year ago. Jill Stein helped kick us off. But I guess I'd just like to start, and I think this has been covered a little bit, but we're looking at the central problem of our time, right? It makes me think of, maybe for the 60s crowd, the Vietnam War was this moment that really defined a generation. And we're looking at climate change affecting our generation in a similar way. But unlike Vietnam, the war on climate is not going to end anytime soon. And unless we build a radical alternative that can begin to mitigate against the effects of climate change, it's going to intensify, and the war on nature is really going to threaten all of us. Now, this has caused a bit of an existential dilemma for some people. This guy named Boyce Scanton, he's a professor at Princeton, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times late last year, and he said, the biggest problem we face is a philosophical one, understanding that civilization is dead. The sooner we confront this problem, and the sooner we realize there's nothing we can do to save ourselves, the sooner we can get down to the hard work of adapting with mortal humility to our new reality. And I think, to counterpose that, I think what we need to do right now is build a movement that is as radical as the reality we face. A movement that is as radical as reality itself. The last panel we discussed how capitalism, in its drive for profit on this finite planet, through its exploitation of workers and the environment, exploitation being the very fuel, through the very basis through which profit is extracted, how that's killing the planet. And that can be kind of depressing when you look at that, right? But what we can see is we can offer an alternative vision, right? A radical alternative. What do workers controlling a factory, what does that look like? If garment workers in Bangladesh had control of what, in traditional Marxist lexicon is called the mode of production, do you think that they would be dumping poisonous dyes into the rivers near where they live? If workers controlled the energy infrastructure in this country, do you think we would be producing coal? If people in West Virginia had a say in the way the government is run, do you think that they would be operating chemical storage plants and not regulating them right upstream from the capital of the state? So what we're facing now is an extreme situation caused by capitalism. And I think it's up to us, as people that care about our earth and our future and our lives, to start building a radical alternative together. And we call this, with system change, we call this eco-socialism, which is to build an ecologically sustainable and just society, and seeing those struggles as interlocked. And I come from New York City, and we went through Superstorm Sandy, and that's a very fine illustration of the way capitalism's inequalities are ingraining themselves on how climate change is ingraining itself on capitalism's inherent inequalities. Because first we had globalization that pushed all the factories and employment centers out of New York City in the early 70s. Then we had the rise, in that vacuum, we had the rise of real estate. And we had people pushed out of the city along coastal lines and employed in marginal and smaller workplaces in the service industry. So we have people pushed out, pushed into lower-waged, non-union jobs, and pushed into the front lines of climate change through gentrification. And what happens is we have a big climate storm that washes into all these neighborhoods. I learned from the last time. Washes into all these neighborhoods upon these people that have been pushed away from the center of the city. So what we're doing here, I'm in 5 minutes in? Cool. So what we're doing in New York City is thinking about, not just about fossil fuels, but we recognize that's a major part of it, but fighting for workers' rights, fighting against gentrification. And if you look at the rise of these global movements that these movements we've seen around the globe, they are actually really fights about the commons. That's a common thread running through all of them that I can think of. You have the seizure of public space. You have, in Brazil, this fight against, displacing working people and building this massive stadium and for public infrastructure. You have Occupy Wall Street, public space. Occupy Gezi, against the demolition of a public park, sparks this massive movement. And I see that as connected to a radical tradition that goes all the way back to the levelers in 1646 England, who believed in a world turned upside down and took over land near London and occupied it. And what we really need to do in this extreme crisis is sort of occupy the world, right? We need to take the people that are mortgaging our future, that are poisoning our environment, and we need to assert our power collectively to take back our planet and our future. And how do we do that? Well, I think one of the things that we're going to have to discuss is how do we unite these different struggles that are going on around the country and around the globe, and how do we add a theoretical depth? In the sense that we can educate ourselves. How can we work on a common project? Stuff like the global climate convergence, like being a very positive step towards that. And that's the object of building an eco-socialist organization, to take fights over local issues, recognize they're all unique, but to bring them all together in a common project, which is to challenge capitalism and to build a radical alternative that puts power in the hands of people and heals the rift between society and nature. That's a world worth fighting for, and the alternative is much scarier. And in contrast to Roy Scranton, the gentleman I quoted at the beginning, I just like to draw a quote from one of my favorite poets. His name is Vladimir Mayakovsky, and he said that in this life, it's not hard to die, but to make life is trickier by far. And I think it's tricky, but I think we have to do that, and we have to all work together to build this radical alternative. And I look forward to working with everyone that's been here and talking about this more in the breakout session. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I'll just add that one idea we've been toying with is maybe forming a system change, not climate change branch in Boston. So to be discussed later. Our next speaker is named Nina Lepke, and she's going to be talking about the Boston Climate Action Network, or BCAN, which has already been talked about a little bit. So Nina has been both a climate and justice activist in Boston for the last 5 years. She just completed her master's degree at Tufts, where she focused on how environmental and justice activists can overcome historical divides and build a common movement. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here on a Saturday afternoon after all the other parts of the conference. It's wonderful to see you all. And so yeah, just a little bit about me. So I started out growing up, of course, I was very passionate about the environment. And then after college, I ended up doing a year of AmeriCorps where I did environmental justice work in Newark, New Jersey, focusing on water pollution and doing hurricane relief trips to the Gulf Coast. And so that really changed my paradigm to thinking that environmental justice is extremely important. Then when I moved to Boston, I did work with youth from low-income communities of color in Boston, working on environmental justice issues. And I also became involved with the Boston Climate Action Network. So the Boston Climate Action Network is an unusual group in that we serve kind of a bridging role between both environmental groups and more kind of groups that frame themselves around climate change, and then also social justice groups. So for a number of years, we've been involved with the Green Justice Coalition, which Kalila mentioned, which brings together labor groups, social justice groups, and environmental groups to do state-level policy change, working for transformative policies. And so being a part of that work was really inspiring to me. And so I just finished my thesis focusing on all the issues that are going on today. And so just to put a little plug in, if any of you feel like geeking out about my thesis with me, I would love to share with you. I don't know if any of you have been through that process, but you feel like you spent months kind of by yourself in front of your computer thinking about all these heady issues. And I interviewed a bunch of really fascinating activists in the Boston area, both on the social justice side and on the climate side. And so definitely let me know if you want to read it and talk to me about it. I would love it. But as far as Boston Climate Action Network, so we are a a group of residents that are working on climate justice issues in the city of Boston. And we have just decided for the year 2014, we're going to focus on 2 issues. So one of those is natural gas leaks, because we feel like they are so important. So in the state of Massachusetts, people are paying $50 million a year. Ratepayers are paying for the leaks. So first of all, it's an issue just for consumers. But of course, in terms of greenhouse gases, methane is much worse for global warming than CO2. So it also has a lot of environmental impacts. And it also has a bunch of other side issues. As you probably know from the explosion in Harlem, there's a lot of safety risk having to do with these leaks. And it also kills trees. It actually suffocates trees over time. And so there's actually a group in Brookline that is suing the utility companies for the over $1 million worth of tree loss caused by natural gas leaks. So we just feel like it's a really opportune time to really focus on that issue. The other thing that we're focusing on this year is that the city of Boston is updating its climate action plan, which it does every 3 years. And so we're really hoping that this time around the city is going to take a little more of an innovative, transformative approach and actually incorporate more social justice concepts into the way that it's thinking about climate action. And so we are networked with a bunch of different groups. So we work with neighborhood sustainability groups, we work with environmental justice groups like ACE, we work with more of the climate groups like 350 Massachusetts. And so we're working right now on building a coalition between those groups to try to figure out how we can best implement policy changes and actually going forward help the city to engage better with groups like ours as they're carrying out those policies. So what I was thinking of for today's session is I actually created an exercise or a game for people to play who want to come into my breakout group, where you can actually play different groups and play different city officials and then have kind of a mock negotiation about city climate policy. So if you feel like today has been really intellectual and in your head and kind of overwhelming, it should be a great opportunity to really think about a really tangible local problem and the actual groups and the types of problems that they would have in working together on movement building at that level. So, so definitely join me if you want to learn more about that after this.
So much. So our next speakers are actually, we have 2 speakers that are Amara and Devin Brackets from the Husky here at Northeastern Environmental Action Team, or HEAT, with their pretty banner up front, as well as Divest Northeastern. So Amara is an environmental science 3rd-year student, and she's also the executive director for HEAT. And Devin is also, he's a 3rd-year environmental science major with a minor in entrepreneurship, and he's a director of outreach. So they're going to sort of tag team the next 10 minutes, and however you want to work that.
Hello, thank you all for joining us today. I've been introduced, my name's Amara, and this is Devin.
Hello.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about what HEAT does on campus and what Divest NU is doing on campus, why we think it's a fantastic idea to divest, and then Devin's going to be speaking more about what we've actually been doing right on campus and just educate our community. Sound good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I am the executive director of the Husky Environmental Action Team here on campus. We go by HEAT. It's kind of fun because we get to use some puns like, yeah, let's turn up the heat, start making some changes on campus. So it's kind of fun. It's a good group of people. We get together every week and we have lots of different committees running, lots of different campaigns running all the time. It's a nice way to bring in a lot of different players that we don't normally see sometimes at some of these environmental actions and on some of these different issues. So we have a group that's working to bring bees on campus. We have a group that's also working with community gardens to keep people invested that way. And then of course we have our divestment campaign running on campus. So some of you may have heard about divestment. It's been in the news lately. A lot of college campuses are running divest campaigns. The state of Massachusetts is considering divesting its pension fund from fossil fuel industry. So did you want to talk about what exactly the process of divestment is?
Yeah. So I mean, divestment as a tactic is kind of, I mean, on an institutional level, I think there's a lot of different narratives that you could use to define why we're divesting. personally, I think that institutions have kind of become an arm of a lot of what you guys have been talking about today, where they exist to, perform research and create technology for the competitive nature that is capitalism. So when we talk about divesting, we're talking about kind of changing the way we think about how institutions now operate. So divesting from fossil fuels is both a tactic to besmirch these companies that have kind of mired the political situation, but it's also an opportunity to reform the institution. So we now have these institutions that hire law firms that are, union busting. We have institutions that are maybe not hiring some of the, best. I don't want to say that the most friendly individuals towards social reform on campus. They choose to kind of divide student groups so that there's not as, we don't see the intersectionality. They kind of try to prevent dialogue on campus, as well as a lot of different policies that just hurt reform. So this is just one step, I think. And yeah, did you want to say more? Or?
Yeah. So with our campaign that we're running on campus, we have a group of very dedicated students. When we first started the Divest campaign on campus, we had 3 students who were interested in this, meeting up weekly. And now all of a sudden, the campaign's just exploded, and we have about 35 students coming out to our weekly meetings, which is really exciting, especially when you think that it's not just, all those crazy environmental people who are coming out. You've got the economics majors at the table, you've got those artists at the table, you've got the business students all there. And that's definitely something that we're trying to promote on campus. We are trying to emphasize the connections between all of these different groups, all these different people with different interests and different values. So we've been running a coalition on campus comprised of student groups from all different areas of student life on campus. So we have the Progressive Student Alliance, which works a lot with labor solidarity and improving conditions on campus and off campus as well. We've got Slow Food Northeastern, which they are concerned with food sources and humane treatment of people and then the food products themselves. So we are bringing together all these different groups. We've got the Marine Biology Club, and what we're trying to emphasize with all of these coalition members is that it's not just, climate change is not just an issue that's going to impact just the environmental side of things. It's not just going to impact the economic side of things. It's going to touch on every part of our lives. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, you all understand that, but it's been very interesting to work with all these different groups and kind of educate them about how necessary it is to take action. So specifically, the Divest campaign that we're running is our tactic that we're using. And during our breakout session, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what tactics we've been using to bring in these different community members and hopefully swap some ideas and get some feedback on what we're doing and where we plan on going.
To all of our speakers, I just want to take this moment to acknowledge some of our sponsors who've been really, really important. So first and foremost, the Northeastern Environmental Justice Research Collaborative, then of course HEAT and Divest Northeastern, and then also the organization that I'm part of, which is Boston Solidarity, which is a socialist, feminist, anti-racist organization. I'd just like to say that we have a monthly meeting, the first Wednesday of every month, and we have a table outside where you'd be able to find out about some of our readings for our next meeting. So in the interest of time, we're going to skip the Q&A for this session, and we're going to take it into the breakout groups. I hope that's okay with everybody. So this is how the breakout groups are going to work. We have 5. So I'm going to suggest that
We're going to combine.
We're going to have 4. So I think this is a great idea because one of the themes of both Jill and Peter's work is around this global climate convergence. So maybe we can organize an event here in Boston to kick that off, and that would be really fantastic. So I'm going to suggest that you guys go here in the back of the room, this corner. So you'll see them there, and that's where that group will meet. Then we have the Huskies, the Divest Northeastern. Maybe you guys can be right up here. So this is where you'll find Amara and Devin. And then we have Ace, maybe Ace and Kalila can be right in the front corner on the other side. So over here, Victor, can you put your hand up? Just this is where Kalila is going to be. And we have one more with Nina and Beacon, which is to my right, all the way in the back of the room. So Matt, can you put your hand up? So where Matt is, that's where you're going to find Nina and her group. And at the very end, like I said, I'd like to come back here and just very, very briefly, we'll collect the events that we're working on next so we know where to find each other. So let's get back here at 5:30. That gives us a little more than a half hour of group time. So get some work done. Thanks.